welcome. We're in the studio today, Mr. Bill Westfall. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we supervise different types of people. And so over the years, you've worked with a handful of different models that address this, that make sure that we can't treat everyone the same, right? Because we're all different, we're all wired differently inside. I know you got some amazing examples. But there was a quote that you used for years, and I'm going to try not to butcher it. And I believe it was from Ken Blanchard, who's an author and a creator of many of these models. And the quote was, "There's no greater unequal than treating unequals equally."
That'll work.
Okay, close enough. So this whole idea of, I guess, supervising, leading, parenting, what have you, coaching with a broad brush for everyone, and how that doesn't work. So can you kind of talk about how you got into this work and what led you to this concept?
You know, as I think about it, I think one of the best things I could do is just tell you an article that I picked up years ago. I think this was probably about mid-'80s.
Sure.
And it was Sports Illustrated. And
Okay.
It was titled, "Toughest Football Coach That Ever Lived."
Oh, wow.
So I'm thinking, all right, Lombardi, you know,
Okay.
Bear Bryant, usually, and those names always come up even in this
Yeah.
era, basically. And so I clicked back to it, and it was neither one of them.
Really?
It was a coach by the name of Bob Victor Bull Cyclone Sullivan, and
That's a mouthful.
they said he was so tough he had two nicknames,
Two,
Bull
okay.
and Cyclone.
And was he a college coach, an NFL coach?
And oddly enough, in a small junior college in Mississippi back in the 1950s and 60s.
Okay.
And the article is 1980, so we're talking 25 years after this
Sure.
had passed, basically. And it was an absolutely fascinating article. And this man's not a country bumpkin. This man
Yeah.
was a master's degree in anthropology. He's a very bright guy, but he was absolutely a legend in that area and still remains to this day. But he was a coach of a junior college in Scuba, Mississippi, and he used to recruit only from 6 counties in that area.
Okay.
What he would call his little bitty boys. Now, I got to thinking, if you're 6'8" and 260 pounds, like
Isn't everyone?
pretty much. But he would contend for national championships almost every year with these huge junior colleges in California.
Oh, wow.
It was just fascinating to read about him. He's way
Yeah.
ahead of his time in sense of the football. But the thing that impressed me that I pulled out of that article was he was talking to another coach one day.
Yeah.
And he says, there's 2 kinds of kids that you're going to coach. Some you got to kick, some you got to pat. He said, you must be very careful, because if you make a mistake and kick when you should pat or pat when you should, you'll do a grave injustice. Now, that's 1950s.
Yeah.
That's pretty forward-thinking philosophy, basically. And then it went on to talk about him and how he applied those things. And he had a wonderful heart.
Yeah.
But boy, he could be tough on people. So he could be both what we call steel and velvet, because the tendency, you come to this earth, is kind of hardwired for one or the other.
Yeah.
But he had the capacity for both of those things. So let me give you a little background about the man. Okay. First of all, he was a young Marine, found himself at Iwo Jima at 18, 19 years of age. I don't have to tell you about the Iwo battle,
Yeah.
where he lost 5 good friends. So he lasted, not wounded, but killed there.
Sure.
And he had 5 stars placed on the uniforms of these young lads to commemorate these young men. And then some of the reputation, he used to, for instance, I think this was an offensive lineman, he would wrap mattresses from the dormitories around pine trees to have them hit the pine trees to see if they can knock the pine cones out of the pine trees, basically. He had the old leather helmets back, but even when they had the more, the better helmets. But he had leather helmets that he painted skull and crossbones on them. He would have his 4th string doing headbutts as warm-ups with each other before the games would start. And it just goes on and on, basically.
Yeah.
But the point being is he had the capacity to do both of these things. And so that really stuck with me. But the illustration I usually use to illustrate this was another Sports Illustrated article. It was called "Whatever Happened to the Sugarland Express?"
Okay.
And this was about a running back that played in Texas, basically, back in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And his name was Ken Hall. And Ken Hall, even in this era, still has records on the records book, basically.
Oh, okay.
So let me, and you don't have to like football. Just let's use, and I like to use sport, though, because it's a meritocracy, and we can objectively measure performance.
Sure.
But a running back, high school, college, or pro, to be a peak performer, 100 yards per game.
Yeah.
And when he was in high school back in the 1950s, he was averaging over 300 yards per game in his senior year.
Okay.
And the records just abound. In his senior year, he ran for over 11,000 yards. That record stood up until just within the last 10 or 15
And this
years.
is a junior college still? Or is
This was in high school.
Oh, high school. Okay. High school.
That was different era. And yet we'd never heard of this kid.
Yeah.
So, and that's what was this whole article, is whatever happened to Sugarland Express. A couple of things. Let me tell you how good he was. He also was a track athlete, and in his senior year, he ran the 100, the 200, broad jump, and here's the amazing, and the shot put. So first thing I would ask is, when was the last time was your sprinter your shot putter? Okay,
That's two different skill sets, really. I mean,
went to the state championships, won the 100, won the 200, won the broad jump, and was second in the shot put. Scored 37 points all by himself in a state championship track meet. His team won the state championship.
and this is in the 1950s.
1950s.
Okay.
But he was the only member from his team to qualify for the state championships. He was a one-person track team.
Wow.
So what we see here is an extraordinary talent, obviously.
Yes.
Coming out and going to, and he ends up at all places at Texas A&M, playing for a young coach by the name of Paul Bear Bryant. Now, to make this long story somewhat concise, Bear Bryant, back in the 50s especially, was a kicker. He wasn't a patter.
Sure.
And this is a kid, in fact, this is interesting to faith. How did he get into football at all? They found him in his senior year, or his freshman year, playing a saxophone or a clarinet in the band room. But they saw how big he was. This kid in high school was over 6 feet. He was about 6'1", 205 pounds. If you were 200 pound in those era, that's a lineman at college level, much like high school. But the other thing is how quick he was and how fast he was. They said he'd come out of the backfield by a second step, he's at full speed.
Wow.
So he's hitting that line. And
Pretty
you should know
impressive.
this too. In college, he once ran 100 yards in grass with cleats. Didn't have he had just light clothing on, but when I say that, but he ran 9.9 seconds over 100 yards in grass. That's world-class speed, basically.
Sure.
So he's big, he's fast, and he's quick. Why haven't we heard about him? He went to play for Bear Bryant, who was a kicker, not a patter.
Okay.
And they had some tension. Basically, kid's a good kid, but he was asking him to do things he'd never done before. He wanted to play, for instance, as a linebacker. He'd always played in the secondary. He liked to catch the ball and run it back, and intercept, those type of things if he would. But they went back and forth, had that tension. His sophomore year, he finally, for the second time, quit. And when he quit, he got drafted by, I think the Houston Oilers, got hit by an all-pro linebacker, did some cervical damage, never played football again.
Yeah.
And even people don't like football, you just feel a loss there because you realize what kind of potential he had, basically.
Sure.
But what I love about this story is this: no bitterness on his part. No bitterness. And he used to have a little barbecue place down there in Fredericksburg, Texas.
Yeah.
And I actually went down there years ago. I wish I'd had a picture of this. But in the corner were no trophies, just an exchange of letters between him and Bear Bryant. Where Bryant had read about him because they did this article, Whatever Happened to the Sugarland Express, and Bryant read it. And he sent him a letter of apology. And so watch what he had learned over the years. He said, you know something, Ken? He said, I made a lot of mistakes with the young men that I coached over the years. But he said, the biggest mistake I ever made was with you. And he apologizes to him.
Yeah.
He said, I guess I should have hugged him rather than kicked him, basically. Yeah. So here's the great thing about Bryant I love. He learned along the way. And he learned to be both what? How to kick and pat. Because the people probably don't know this or remember, but Joe Namath was a quarterback for Bear Bryant. He called Bear to his face Bear. Nobody called Bear to his face Bear, not even his wife, okay?
Yeah.
And one of the other players said to him, he said, well, how come I can't call you Bear? He says, because you don't throw passes like Namath. So my point is he realized that what? And so he became flexible and had this capacity to both kick and pat. So, and that's a tough thing to learn, because as I said to you, and my experiences have been that they have data to support this, usually come here more direct or more supportive. But you've got to be able to do both of those things to get people and organizations to 90 miles per hour.
Yeah, and so, but generally we're hardwired to do one or the other. And we believe from our frame of reference that everyone needs what we need. I've heard that from a lot of people that I've worked with and talked with and coached. I project what I need, and I think I'm being helpful, And what they don't understand is, no, you're just making everybody mad and offending and those types of things.
And frustrating.
Right. And then that leads to conflict, and we know what happens through that process. So the importance, though, and I've learned this through parenting too, because you have your first child and you get your reps in and you get your routine, and same two parents, same house, and then here comes number two. And then we have this, we've done it before, but then about a couple weeks in you realize, well, the first one, we didn't have another one to work with, right? So we could focus all our attention on there, but then they start to grow up and you realize the personalities are different.
The same gene pool.
Yes, and what works with one doesn't with the other. And so when you talk about, patting or kicking, being direct or supportive, we have to take that and apply it as well to our teams.
Absolutely.
And understanding them is the first step of that.
Yes.
So getting to know them, understanding how they're wired, how they communicate, how they see the world, what is their frame of reference, and building all of that into almost like a file in our minds, so we know how to approach them with the same problem that we have to approach everybody on the team, but it has to be a different conversation. Is that basically what you're saying?
We're seeing a lot of that right now with this transition of this administration and how they come in. And it's going to be fascinating to watch. If you can keep a good sense of humor, as I've said, but to see what works and what does not work, because you're going to see both the success and failure here, as you'll see, because it's quite a transition.
Yeah. So I think another example really of this is the model that you've built as well over time, called the Q6. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of really takes a deeper look, though, at where someone's at in their own development stage and what type of leadership you need to apply to them.
And that was the greatest help for me, and especially when you look in the public safety venue, because our people, the trauma that they have to deal with, as an example.
Yeah.
And what we were finding is that the leadership models per se that were available that helped us to differentiate people didn't address those issues, basically. So it caused us in the public safety sector to say, can we find a model, basically, based on the research, with good solid research, to help us to be able to do that. And we brought that online in 2018, so here we are 6-7 years later.
Yeah.
And we've implemented that in a number of agencies, and we've watched it work now. We've also said this, we knew it would save lives and save careers, and we've got case studies to substantiate that now.
Sure, yeah, but and even when we branch outside of that, we're starting to see and learn now, because we're being more open, I guess, and honest with ourselves, trauma that people face everywhere.
Sure.
Right? For years we thought, well, it just came from the military, and when our veterans came home, then we learned it was going into public safety and police, fire, and medics probably. Many a times I know, seeing tragic incidents, especially happening to children, was very traumatic for a lot of them. But now we have people that are either in abusive relationships or are suffering with mental health issues, or families that are,
Absolutely.
And all these things that are happening. So that's a good piece to know as well.
Tragic accidents that occur just daily.
Death, divorce, loss in general. We grieve it all the same. Awesome, Bill. Well, another great piece. Appreciate you coming back out today. We're excited to get things ramped back up this year and have more content going. Anything that you're looking forward to doing this year? 2025?
I'm at a stage now where I go where I want to go and do what I want to do, and it's really enjoyable. So I want to thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is obviously one of those places we love coming to.
Excellent. Well, we can't wait till you come back next time.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks.